Hi, everyone. It's 11:30, so I'll get started. I'll introduce myself, and then we'll just get right into this chat about being creative in some of these crazy, crazy times. I'm a Facebook Live newbie, so please bear with me if anything goes wrong. Feel free to add things in the chat or to say hello or ask questions. I'd love to hear from you all who are out there. So about a little bit about me, my name is Fawnda, and I do a number of things. Largely, I am a creative producer here in Edmonton. I do event production with festivals. I have done that for about 10 years. Right now I am the executive director at LitFest, so we run a nonfiction. Yeah, thanks. It's a nonfiction festival that runs in October every year. So we have 11 days of events with authors, usually in person and in live and intimate settings. Then I also, I am a podcaster, so I work with the Alberta Podcast Network. I'm part of their program coordinator, and and also I have a podcast. I have had a podcast for 6 years. It's called I Don't Get It, and it's on reviewing performances in Edmonton, of which there are not many happening right now. So we've had to pivot and be creative about that as well. I started out working in media and mostly arts media, writing about the arts. And somehow, in some way, in about 2008, I got into festival production. I took the general manager's job at the Free Will Shakespeare Festival. So from there, working on your toes in an outdoor environment where, the weather can change pretty instantly, taught me a lot about being able to adapt and innovate and pivot fairly quickly, even when you're doing things that are as traditional as Shakespeare. So kind of fast forward, I worked for another theater network, and then took the job with LitFest in 2014. And since then have been trying to be creative and innovative about programming around books and authors. Those events like that are often, someone standing at the front of a room and reading, and people buy the book and they get it signed and then leave. Although everyone loves the intimacy of that sort of thing, we've over the years with LitFest tried to be really creative with how we deliver those types of events. So started partnering with restaurants and other venues, and basically trying to find ways to take those types of events off the page, so to speak. And in this era, now what we're trying to do is also take those events off the screen, because as many of you may feel right now, even in this setting, screen time can be a little bit exhausting, and it doesn't offer the same intimacy and connection that we hope we can offer with creative events sometimes. So thinking about all of that in a larger idea around sort of, programming, what we're doing for audiences now, and what maybe you can do even as a business person for your clients, in how you're packaging the content that you want to deliver. We've heard a lot of the word pivot in this in this era that is upon us, and the pivot is really an examination of maybe not exactly what you're delivering, but the platform and how you're delivering it. And in most cases right now, especially when it comes to theater and live events or any kind of creative events, is that this is all pivoted to this format that we're seeing now. And what the challenge is when it comes to really getting into the importance of what you're delivering when you are doing even something as simple as just like like a camera and a screen, and how many of you out there watching, is that there is still story behind it, because even when there is uncertainty and a lot of unpredictability around situation, humans still crave story, and we still need to feel that that real connection. Like even you know, like the way that we're sitting and gathering today, we're still just sort of like sitting around and looking at you know, an interesting source of light and listening to someone speak. And that is so intrinsic and human about what the way that people want to absorb information and the way that they want to gain understanding for the world. So the challenge in creating programming around this sort of time, when we're kind of stuck in this say, you know, square screen format, is still to actually find find that story and find that intimacy of storytelling. And there's you know, there's a favorite Atwood quote that I always kind of like go back to, in that it's she says, "You're never going to kill storytelling because it's built in the human plan." It is what we are, and humans, for, you know, time immemorial and all that sort of thing, you know, have gathered in this way to really to help understand each other and to connect. So as everyone goes towards Zoom and tries to connect online, how do you preserve the importance of that idea of story and of sharing story, and of connecting? You know, I can see that there are some of you out there now, and the connection in a live setting would normally be for me to hear you laughing, or, you know, in a poetry reading, finger snapping, or applause, or, you know, and also I feel that that's one thing that's really challenging to see when you are in an audience and you can't hear the rest of the audience either. So that's why things like, you know, I guess like the comment chat books and things like that are important, so that you see that other people are having the same experience as you are. And that's something that I feel has been maybe in the live streaming way a little bit, it has been innovative to see, you know, like how those kind of chat functions and things like that really get used, because a lot of times people are also just sort of like sitting in the background in Zoom, like, you know, camera off, I'm not, you know, I'm just like watching from afar, not engaging. And that's really part of like what's difficult about the loss of programming, I guess, when you're all, we're behind all of these walls, we're behind these screen firewalls, I guess. So, but I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple of the cool things that I've seen in programming in just in the last recent weeks, from some local folks, and also things that I've been doing, or that my organizations that I work with have been working on. There's sort of like three types of the of creativity and programming that I've seen come out, and I'll talk a little bit about what has happened with live events first. So in the literary world, there's a festival called the Festival of Literary Diversity. They're one of the first festivals of the year in the literary genre in Canada, and they were one of the first ones that had to pivot online very quickly. And they happen in Brampton, Ontario every year. And so what was really cool about it was that I've actually was able to attend that festival this year, and normally I would never be able to go just because of the timing and the location. But what is also great about those literary events or other events that have been able to pivot online is that the local audience, say in Brampton or in Edmonton, is able to attract a much higher much higher level of guests sometimes than would normally be able to like afford, or would maybe even want to travel to that city. So that's kind of opened the world in a lot of cool ways. I think that the Fold events did a really good job with programming panels that had important stories to tell. They had full panels on reconciliation and diverse representation in the Canadian publishing scene. They had one whole panel that was all about debating the importance of literary awards in the country. And so those conversations and just the people that were gathered, those voices, it was really great to see. So the way that we're trying to consider what to do with LitFest this year, instead of just kind of pivoting to a bunch of online Zoom panels, because I think by October, when LitFest actually happens, that a lot of people will still be really tired of Zoom and things like that. So what we're going to try and do really is do something that's a bit more immersive. This is kind of an idea that I've stolen from immersive theater, but it will involve authors doing readings. So you get to experience an author reading a chapter of their book or a story from that they've selected. And then that story is also paired with, say, a local business or an artist in Edmonton that is able to enhance the experience in some way. The best way I can illustrate this is one of the examples that we are working on is a book that is an anthology of new Canadian writers. They're all writing about their specific experiences with food from the countries that they've come from, but that's that food within the Canadian context. And so the idea is that you will download, say, a podcast recording or a pre-recorded message, hearing the author reading, and during that reading, what you will be sort of tasked to do is to make a recipe. And maybe we partner with a business to deliver that meal kit so that it's all ready for you to go. And that the experience of hearing that story at the same time as you cooking a meal that has relevance to that story makes it that sort of like real time immersive experience. And that is what, that is one way that we want to try and emphasize that story, is that physical action, that engagement, that really, like being in the story and being with the author, at least in some way, at least in the food that you can smell or some way like that. So thinking about those kinds of ideas. There's another example of an immersive theater piece that's happening in Edmonton right now. It's called Tracks. It's part of the Fringe's off-season event. And it's sold out, unfortunately, so you wouldn't be able to get a ticket for it. But what they've done is that it's 9 storytellers. It is a live performance. So when you're half hour before the show, you're given a link. You click the link and that's your ticket, and you basically are able to choose your own adventure between these 9 storytellers. Throughout the timing of the show, there's one narrator, and so there's 8 different stories that you could choose from, and you only really have time to see 4 because they're all on timed segments. So you could, hypothetically, if they were to do it again, you could try and watch the show more than once so that you get the experience more than once. But that's another creative thing that is happening in the sort of like live event stream that's beyond just sort of like turning your screen on and hitting record. In the podcasting realm, we've seen some real interesting creativity too. I talked a little bit about my own podcast just before this, or earlier on. The mandate for the podcast is really to review live performances in Edmonton. And since those aren't really happening, we decided that what we would do instead was do long form interviews with local people working in the arts who are affected by the pandemic. So we've talked with Peter Brown, who is a radio broadcaster, but he's also producing the Dynasty live improvised soap opera every week. So that's like another amazing creative thing that is happening in the programming realm, is that an improv company that does a soap opera every week live on stage, they've pivoted now to doing a radio show that gets packaged and recorded. It's actually quite fun to watch. It's at dynastyimprov.com, I believe. The new shows come out every Monday, but you can see this, like 20 performers or so actually in the Zoom recording in their own homes. So that's kind of neat. That's sort of like an intimate way of being able to see like how they've really put things together in an online space, and frankly are still having a lot of fun with it. Because I think in particular, even for like improvisers and actors and people who are used to creating in rooms with people and also being very physically close to each other, because that's a lot of times where great comedy comes in even, is that they're finding new ways to make these connections as well. But yeah, and also the other things that are happening in the podcast realm too is that a lot of more people are doing sort of like live shows. We've seen some shows that pivot to more conversation style, like, you know, for example, say sports podcasts when there's no games to talk about or things like that. They're talking more about, you know, the industry and what is happening with all of the, you know, the great pause. So it's so it is interesting to see. I think that there is a lot more commentary happening now than actual event production, but it will be really interesting to see what happens in the creative sector as time goes on, while venues remain closed and while distancing remains in place. I think that there is a lot more I think nuance and innovation to be found in terms of what really comes out. You know, I think that the idea of doing immersive things in unique ways will continue to be fleshed out. We'll see a lot more innovation, and hopefully actually see a lot more Canadian theater and Canadian productions being represented. It feels like there's you know, a wealth of British work out there and even American work through PBS, and Canadian. There actually historically hasn't been a ton of great investment in preserving live theater production in Canada on video, so that's why we're actually not seeing very much of it being broadcast during whereas we're seeing a lot of other productions. So that's just a side note for, you know, if you want to write your MP or anything like that and be like, we believe that we should be able to see great Canadian theater even in a pandemic, so make sure it gets recorded. Side note, anyhow. I feel like I've talked a lot. So if there are any questions or anything, I see Natalie has a comment here. It'll be amazing to see the creative sector's output in history books. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening. There's a lot of art that's really in trouble. I read something this morning that even the Globe Theatre may shut down because they can't, you know, it will be, I think what will be really cool, especially in terms of history, is seeing what happens with the artistic spaces and the historical buildings that are maybe not museums and things like that, but I also read a statistic earlier today that 1 in 3 museums is set to shut down. So that's, you know, that's another kind of interesting thing as well. Yeah, so I'm looking, I don't see any other comments or anything. But yeah, well, I guess one thing on the podcasting business side of things that has been creative with the Alberta Podcast Network is that we did find that some advertisers were wanting to adjust their messaging because they didn't really think that it was appropriate to be sort of like hawking different, you know, kind of business products during the pandemic. So we created a program called Pod Power that actually allows them to donate their ads to sort of a selection of nonprofit and community-driven and independent podcasts that normally wouldn't actually be allowed, able to afford advertising on the network. So those kinds of creative things are also happening too, and it's neat to see not only you know, like artistic and creative organizations, but also business organizations are having to be creative with what they're doing as well. So yeah, I think that that's, you know, a lot of the things that are happening. I hope you're all doing well out there. I'm not sure, I think I see the comment box here. There's not very many comments, so yeah, I think I will leave it at that. Yeah, everyone, I hope you have a really good day out there. It's not very nice outside, but if you can get some fresh air, please do. And yeah, and thanks to the Creative Hive and to Des for inviting me to chat today. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.